We have today a relatively new feast. It was only Blessed Paul VI who canonized these martyrs, and the canonization had one particular element which not everyone noticed. He, first of all, gave a historic note. You may remember that in the early stages, North Africa was evangelized well. We had great giants that came out of there. Augustine, who gave us a whole theology and language, beautiful Latin, a great brain. He was Bishop of Hippo. But there are others too, who also gave us a whole spirituality in very good Latin, which was spoken as the language of culture in North Africa, rather as English is nowadays in India. In Carthage, you had a great centre, and there you had Cyprian, a great witness of the early church's faith, for instance, in the importance even of Peter. You had also Tertullian, a great writer, who gave us a body of teaching and good language to go with it. The ecclesiastical Latin, which became the basis, even to this day, of Church Latin as we know it. A vocabulary was formed. Then what happened? Well, first of all, we must understand how it worked. The church in Africa worked on the same basis as the church in Italy, and indeed in general as it worked in the early stages of the church, that wherever there was an agglomeration of people, a town, fairly small town by our standards, there would automatically be a bishop. That meant that all over the place, in Italy and in Africa and these early places, there were bishops all over the place. And we've had that to handle until recently in Italy, when only now, in the last 50 years, they've started to have to reduce the number of bishops by amalgamating dioceses. Our own diocese, when I was ordained, would have been a separate diocese. Now it's only one out of three other ones, all under Siena. Now, in Africa, it was a very good church because there were things like this going on. You had Augustine, who had been for a good while with his friends, a monk essentially, and his sister was superior of a nunnery, and he wrote their rule, which also became the Augustinian rule for the brethren. And then when he became bishop, surprisingly in Hippo, at the death of another bishop, Valerian I think his name was, he took with him brethren, formed them, they lived as priests with him, and they were very useful in his hands. And what happened was, the bishopric itself was a monastery and a place where they were forming fantastic preachers and pastors. So what happened? All the area around was filled with these wonderful priests, now making them bishops, which had responsibility for all these other churches around. So you can see the power of that over an area. So it should have worked very well. Two things went wrong. First of all, there was a split in the church in North Africa. It was a strange kettle of fish. It wasn't exactly like Protestantism nowadays. They called them the Donatists. They seem to have had valid sacraments, but they weren't in union with the mainstream. And they were kind of getting on together, side by side. But the problem was this. It weakened the church. And can you see how that would have been a problem a little bit down the line when another force came into the continent? Do you know what it was, little children? What happened in that whole part of the world? There was somebody born who had a huge influence on humankind around the 600s, 622 or so, I believe. Well, by now it's the fastest growing religion or society, I don't know what you want to call it. It's the founder of Islam, who took basically bits of Christianity, bits of Judaism, and bits of the lingering paganism, and made the present Islam, based on not evangelization by word, but by the sword. Now this then was the new force coming at what was a peaceful North Africa based on grace, faith, preaching and prayer. What happened? All they division between the Donatists and the mainstream made them weak in their common fronting of this. But then what happened was this. The very powerful means that the Islamic bloc had of forcing people started to work. Not so much in making them apostatize and leave the faith, but in this, that they were able in practice to erase them from the face of the earth by, let's say it, and this is the fact, unfortunately, beheading them. Beheading them, beheading them, beheading them, beheading them. So they just disappeared. That was what happened in North Africa, a once massively powerful holy church. So it doesn't mean that Islam conquered, it just means that we had martyrs. It's not quite the same. Now, Paul VI was making an allusion to the early martyrs, because lots of them, even under Romans, they were still martyring them until 312. No, 303 was the last great persecution, 304, under Diocletian. And then we have this new wave of evangelization coming in through missionaries coming much later in time. When I was a young monk in France, I would hear this on the grapevine. My prior, who was French, Breton, was saying that when he was a young seminarian, the challenge of the missions was something else. Because it meant still quite often martyrdom, and that's going back in time now, and people realised what a challenge it was. And if you go now to not far away Dalgan here, you go back to the chapel, the beautiful chapel in the middle of Dalgan, run by these missionaries, Colombian missionaries. Look at the whole wall in the back area where you come in. It's full of pictures and life stories. Each one is a hero who went out there not from France but from Ireland, and they had terrible, terrible torture and martyrdom quite often. And that's what it was. For these young men, they knew what it meant. So this then was what was going on in the 1800s and so on. People were coming from these countries, and the French influence is strong in North Africa. They were being eventually martyred. So these are the new martyrs of Uganda. Now, one thing I just want to finish on is this. Blessed Paul VI made one very unusual step when he made these officially saints of the church. He put them in the same album, as it were, as the great martyrs of old, a great line of heroes, but then he added this bit. And let us not forget the many who belonged to the Anglican institutions of faith, who also gave their lives. Now that was a very powerful statement from a pope canonizing these. Do you see what that meant? It meant that martyrdom somehow, in one instant, made them massively participants of the merits of Calvary. And at that moment, when they opened their eyes after the atrocity of torture, they are all completely washed in the blood of Christ, and things are seen in a different vision. Perhaps it's not quite the same as we see it in this world. We have a certain mentality. Once you're on the cross with Christ, perhaps things are a little simpler. I finish with that. We need to have respect for these that we don't know fully and don't fully share the communion with. Because after all, there are other issues involved as well. And the present Pope actually made a very poignant remark recently when talking to a massive number of Lutherans. He made this remark. He was asked off the cuff by a young person there, almost tongue-in-cheek, who does God prefer, Catholics or Lutherans? And the Pope looked straight back and said, what do you prefer? A tepid Catholic or a fervent Catholic? A tepid Lutheran or a fervent Lutheran? And so he said it in this key. The vision of God is quite different. And maybe a loving soul who hasn't exactly the same dogma as ourselves is far closer to the heart of Christ than someone